in my pocket. My son is now 12. I'm still married and I love my wife dearly. We had to make a living. I was younger than I am now and thought I needed more. I didn't believe in prohibiting people from getting the things they wanted.
What's up everyone, Tyler Maderos here and welcome to Tyler Maderos TV. For those of you that are not subscribed, you can subscribe down below so you don't miss a video, and for those of you that are, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the notorious gangster Al Capone. And this story is a true story. Now I want to know what you guys think about this story down below in the comments, and if you believe that this actually happened. Now before we get into the story, for those of you who may not know who Al Capone was, let me tell you just a little bit about him. Now let's start off with Al Capone's actual name was Alphonse Gabriel Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, known as Al Capone, was an American businessman and gangster during the Prohibition era. Capone was also well known by his nickname, which was Scarface. Capone's parents would end up immigrating from Italy to New York City, where Alphonse Gabriel Capone, known as Al Capone, would be born in 1899. Now, by the time Al Capone was a teenager, he would end up joining a gang called the 5 Points. Now, Al Capone would eventually go on to becoming an organized crime bouncer, which would mean that he would be security at places like brothels, clubs, and anything that had to do with organized crime. Now, this job would actually lead Al Capone to leaving New York City and moving to Chicago, where Al Capone would then become the personal bodyguard for Johnny Torrio. Now, Johnny Torrio was actually the crime syndicate leader of illegal alcohol during Prohibition. Capone and Johnny's relationship became so strong that Johnny would end up trusting Capone with many other responsibilities. Now, it would be when a gang called the North Side Gang would attempt to take Johnny's life that he would decide to retire from organized crime. Johnny would then hand over his organization to the notorious Al Capone. Capone would then go on to use his power and violence to expand the bootlegging business. Now, it seemed that with the relationships that Al Capone had with people like the mayor of Chicago and the Chicago police force, it seemed like Al Capone was untouchable. It began to seem that Al Capone did not have to worry about law enforcement or have to move very carefully. Al Capone would go on to be so well known and liked in the community that they would call him the modern day Robin Hood. He would get this name from all the donations that he had made to the community and charities. Now, with being such a public figure and having so many things to hide, this picture of Al Capone wouldn't last forever. It would be on Valentine's Day in 1929 that everything would change for the notorious crime boss Al Capone. The morning of February 14th, 1929, 4 unknown men, 2 of which were dressed as police officers, while the other 2 were dressed in suits and ties, walked into a garage in Lincoln Park, Chicago, where they would then line up the 7 men that were inside the garage against the wall and execute them. 5 of the people were part of the Irish Northsiders, which were Al Capone's competitors, and the other 2 of them were just affiliates of the gang. The attack was the result of a battle that had been going on between the 2 gangs during the Prohibition time, because there was only room for one person to be in power and control the city. Al Capone and leader of the North Side Gang, George Bugs Moran, seemed to have had a few scores to settle. It was also said that the order was given by Al Capone to take out the leader of the North Side Gang, George Bugs Moran. But the interesting thing was, when the attack was carried out, George Bugs Moran was not in the warehouse. Now, one of the people that were there in the warehouse and actually got murdered was a man named Albert, who went by the alias James Clark, aka Jimmy. Now, Jimmy was George Bugs' brother-in-law and the second in command for the North Side Gang. Now, that is something that you're gonna wanna keep in mind. When police arrived to the scene, one of the men named Frank Gussenberg was still alive. He was quickly taken to the hospital, where doctors seemed to get him stabilized for a short time so law enforcement could possibly question him. When police questioned Frank about who may have shot him, his reply was, "Nobody shot me." even though he had been shot 14 times. It was only 3 hours later, Frank would end up passing away in the hospital. Now, many people in organized crime thought that Al Capone was the one who called this attack. And also, law enforcement as well thought Al Capone was the one behind this attack. Now, Al Capone had a solid alibi. At the time of the attack, he was in Miami in his mansion. Now, it was said that the motive of the attack was to get payback due to a hijacking that occurred with some illegal whiskey that was being transported from Canada to Illinois. Now, it is said when Bugs arrived to the warehouse, he could see a police car approaching the warehouse, which at that point, he told his member to turn the car around and they left the area. Now, it's said that one of Al Capone's lookouts mistakenly identified one of the members to be George Bugs. Now, the person that was mistakenly identified was actually George Bugs' brother-in-law, Albert, aka Jimmy Clark. Jimmy Clark and George Bugs were very similar in size, and it said that that day they were wearing the same colored hat and overcoat. Now, the weapons that were used in the attack were 2 machine guns and 2 shotguns, leaving the people that were involved unrecognizable. After this attack on Valentine's Day, known as the Valentine's Day Massacre, the public demanded that something be done, and everybody had had enough. It was only days after that Al Capone would receive a summons to appear in front of a Chicago grand jury due to prohibition violations. But at that time, Al Capone claimed he was too sick to attend. The federal authorities were persistent on getting Al Capone behind bars though. On May 17th, 1929, Al Capone and his bodyguard, while in Philadelphia, would be arrested for having a concealed deadly weapon, which would land him and his bodyguard with a year sentence. But Al Capone ended up being released from prison just after 9 months due to good behavior. Now, this is where the story takes a frightening turn. Well, Al Capone served his 9 months in his luxurious cell, which included paintings on the walls, full furniture, and a cabinet radio, which in today's day is like having a big screen TV. Capone's cell was like no other cell in the jail, and the notorious gangster, which was all alone, didn't really think he was alone. One night, the jail was silent until the guards could hear this spine-chilling scream coming from the cell area. When the guards approached the cells, they noticed that the person screaming was no other than Al Capone. Now, not only was Al Capone letting out these blood-curdling screams, but he was also screaming out a name, and that name was Jimmy. As the name and the screams echoed throughout the prison, the guards were shocked to notice that Al Capone was alone in his cell. It began to seem that George Bugs' brother-in-law, Jimmy Clark, began to seek revenge from the other side. It appeared that Jimmy Clark would haunt Al Capone day and night in his cell. Now, when Al Capone was released from prison, he was hoping that that would be the end of the haunting of Jimmy Clark. It's said from people close to him that Jimmy Clark haunted him until the day he died on January 25th, 1947. He would end up dying from cardiac arrest after suffering from a stroke in his Miami mansion, which is located on Palm Island in Miami Beach, Florida. Now, these are actual photos of the mansion. Now, I want to know what you guys think of that video down below in the comments. Do you believe Al Capone was truly being haunted by somebody he had murdered? But for me, I personally think that Jimmy Clark was haunting Al Capone until the day he died. But I'm going to go ahead and close out today's video here. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. I want to thank you guys so much for all the love and support that you guys continuously give me. It means the world to me, and I will see you guys in my next video. Peace.